dreams. Nynaeve carried the smoothed-out pages to the table and set them down. She hesitated before spreading the others out and running her finger down one page, then the next. "Here's one Matt would enjoy," she said, in a voice much too light and airy. "Item: a carved cluster of 6 spotted dice, joined at the corners, less than 2 inches across. Use unknown, save that channeling through it seems to suspend chance in some way, or twist it." She began to read aloud. Tossed coins presented the same face every time, and in one test landed balanced on edge 100 times in a row. 1,000 tosses of the dice produced 5 crowns 1,000 times. She gave a forced laugh. Matt would love that. Egwene sighed and got to her feet, walked stiffly to the fireplace. Elaine scrambled up, watching as silently as Nynaeve. Pushing her sleeve as far up her arm as it would go, Egwene reached carefully up the chimney. Her fingers touched wool on the smoke shelf, and she pulled out a wadded, singed stocking with a hard lump in the toe. She brushed a smear of soot from her arm, then took the stocking to the table and shook it out. The twisted ring of striped, flecked stones spun across the tabletop and fell flat atop a page of the ter'angreal list. For a few moments they just stared at it. "Perhaps," Nynaeve said finally, "Varen simply missed the fact that so many of them were last studied by Corianen." She did not sound as if she really believed it. Elaine nodded, but doubtfully. "I saw her walking in the rain once, soaking wet, and took a cloak to her. She was so wrapped up in whatever she was thinking, I do not believe she knew it was raining until I put the cloak around her shoulders. She could have missed it." "Maybe," Egwene said. "If she did not, she had to know I'd notice as soon as I read the list. I do not know. Sometimes I think Varen notices more than she lets on. I just do not know." "So there's Varen to suspect," Elaine sighed. "If she is Black Aja, then they know exactly what we are doing. And Alana." She gave Egwene an uncertain, sidelong look. Egwene had told them everything, except what happened inside the ter'angreal during her testing. She could not bring herself to talk about that, any more than Nynaeve or Elaine could tell of their testings. Everything that happened in the testing chamber, what Shiriam had said about the terrible weakness conferred by the ability to change, every word Varen had said, whether it seemed important or not. The one part they had had trouble accepting was Alana. Aes Sedai just did not do things
large enough for the caravan to step through. Malice sat through it all, trying to appear unimpressed. Hundreds of curious soldiers watched the procession as it made its way to the central structure of House Baenri, the great purple-glowing chapel dome. The common soldiers left the entourage, leaving only the 4 high priestesses to escort Matron Malice inside. The sight beyond the great doors to the chapel did not disappoint her. A central altar dominated the place, with a row of benches spiraling out in several dozen circuits to the perimeter of the great hall. 2,000 drow could sit there with room to stretch. Statues and idols, too numerous to count, stood all over the place, glowing in a quiet black light. In the air high above the altar loomed a gigantic glowing image, a red and black illusion that slowly and continually shifted between the forms of a spider and a beautiful drow female. "The work of Grumph, my principal wizard," Matron Baenri explained from her perch on the altar, guessing that Malice, like everyone else who ever came to Chapel Baenri, was awestruck by the sight. "Even wizards have their place." "As long as they remember their place," Malice replied, slipping down from the now stationary disc. "Agreed," said Matron Baenri. "Males can get so presumptuous at times, especially wizards. Still, I wish that I had Grumph at my side more often these days. He has been appointed Archmage of Menzo Baranzon, you know, and seems always at work on Narbendel or some other such tasks." Malice...
Oh, really? Give me 1 sec, everyone. My speaker just went there. should help if I played the book, huh?
Everybody knew. Everybody knew, too, that Behenry's daughter, Triel, was the matron mistress of the academy, a position of honor in Menzo Berenzon, second only to the title of matron mother of an individual family. Malice had little doubt that Matron Behenry would somehow work that fact into the conversation before too long. Before Malice took a step toward the stairs to the altar, her newest escort stepped out from the shadows. Malice scowled openly when she saw the thing, a creature known as an illithid, a mind flayer. It stood about 6 feet tall, fully a foot taller than Malice, most of the difference being the result of the creature's enormous head. Glistening with slime, the head resembled an octopus with pupilless, milky-white eyes. Malice composed herself quickly. Mind flayers were not unknown in Menzo Berenzon, and rumors said that one had befriended Matron Behenry. These creatures, though, more intelligent and more evil than even the drow, almost always inspired shudders of revulsion. "You may call him Methil," Matron Behenry explained. "His true name is beyond my pronunciation. He is a friend." Before Malice could reply, Behenry added, "Of course, Methil gives me the advantage in our discussion, and you are not accustomed to illithids." Then, as Malice's mouth drooped open in disbelief, Matron Behenry dismissed the illithid. "You read my thought," Malice protested. Few could insinuate themselves through the mental barriers of a high priestess well enough to read her thoughts, and the practice was a crime of the highest order in drow society. "No," Matron Behenry explained, immediately on the defensive. "Your pardon, Matron Malice. Methil reads thoughts, even the thoughts of a high priestess, as easily as you or I hear words. He communicates telepathically. On my word, I did not even realize that you had not yet spoken your thoughts." Malice waited to watch the creature depart the great hall, then walked up the steps to the altar. In spite of her efforts against the action, she could not help peeking up at the transforming spider and drow image every now and then. "How fares House Do'Urden?" Matron Behenry asked, feigning politeness. "Well enough," replied Malice, more interested at that moment in studying her counterpart than in conversing. They were alone atop the altar, though no doubt a dozen or so clerics wandered through the shadows of the great hall, keeping a watchful eye on the situation. Malice had all that she could handle in hiding her contempt for Matron Behenry. Malice was old, nearly 500, but Matron Behenry was ancient. Her eyes had seen the rise and fall of a millennium by some accounts, though drow rarely lived past their 7th, and certainly not their 8th century. While drow normally did not show their age, Malice was as beautiful and vibrant now as she had been on her 100th birthday. Matron Behenry was withered and worn. The wrinkles surrounding her mouth resembled a spider's web, and she could hardly keep the heavy lids of her eyes from dropping altogether. Matron Behenry should be dead, Malice noted, but still she lives. Matron Behenry, seeming so beyond her time of life, was pregnant, and due in only a few 10 days. In this aspect, too, Matron Behenry defied the norm of the Dark Elves. She had given birth 20 times, twice as often as any others in Menzo Berenzon, and 15 of those she bore were female, every one a high priestess. 10 of Behenry's children were older than Malice. "How many soldiers do you now command?" Matron Behenry asked, leaning closer to show her interest. 300, Malice replied. "Oh," mused the withered old drow, pursing a finger to her lips. "I had heard the count at 350. Malice grimaced in spite of herself. Behenry was teasing her, referring to the soldiers House Do'Urden had added in its raid on House de Vere. 300, Malice said. "Of course," replied Behenry, resting back. "And House Behenry holds 1,000, Malice asked, for no better reason than to keep herself on even terms in the discussion. "That has been our number for many years." Malice wondered again why this old, decrepit thing was still alive. Surely more than one of Behenry's daughters aspired to the position of matron mother, Why hadn't they conspired and finished Matron Behenry off? Or why hadn't any of them, some in the later stages of life, struck out on their own to form separate houses, as was the norm for noble daughters when they passed their 5th century? While they lived under Matron Behenry's rule, their children would not even be considered nobles, but would be relegated to the ranks of the commoners. "You have heard of the fate of House de Vere?" Matron Behenry asked directly, growing as tired of the hesitant small talk as her counterpart. "Of what house?" Malice asked pointedly. At this time, there was no such thing as House de Vere in Menzoberranzan. To Drow reckoning, the house no longer existed. The house never existed. Matron Behenry cackled. "Of course," she replied. "You are Matron Mother of the 9th house now. That is quite an honor." Malice nodded. "But not as great an honor as Matron Mother of the 8th house." "Yes," agreed Behenry. "But 9th is only one position away from a seat on the ruling council." "That would be an honor indeed," Malice replied. She was beginning to understand that Behenry was not simply teasing her, but was congratulating her as well, and prodding her on to greater glories. Malice brightened at the thought. Behenry was in the highest favor of the Spider Queen. If she was pleased with House de Werden's ascension, then so was Lolth. "Not as much of an honor as you would believe," said Behenry. "We are a group of meddling old females, gathering every so often to find new ways to put our hands into places they do not belong. The city recognizes your rule. Does it have a choice?" Behenry laughed. "Still, Drow business is better left to the matron mothers of the individual houses. Lolth would not stand for a presiding council exacting anything that even remotely resembled total rule. Do you not believe that House Behenry would have conquered all of Menzoberranzan long ago, if that was the Spider Queen's will?" Malice shifted proudly in her chair, appalled by such arrogant words. "Not now, of course," Matron Behenry explained. "The city is too large for such an action in this age. But long ago, before you were even born, House Behenry would not have found such a conquest difficult. But that is not our way. Lolth encourages diversity. She is pleased that houses stand to balance each other, ready to fight beside each other in times of common need." She paused a moment and let a smile appear on her wrinkled lips. "And ready to pounce upon any that fall out of her favor." Another direct reference to House de Vere, Malice noted, this time directly connected to the Spider Queen's pleasure. Malice eased out of her angry posture and found the rest of her discussion, fully 2 hours long, with Matron Behenry, quite enjoyable. Still, when she was back on the disc and floating out through the compound, past the grandest and strongest house in all of Menzoberranzan, Malice was not smiling. In the face of such an open display of power, she could not forget that Matron Behenry's purpose in summoning her had been twofold: to privately and cryptically congratulate her on her perfect coup, and to vividly remind her not to get too ambitious. 5. Weaning. For 5 long years, Vierna devoted almost every waking moment to the care of baby Drizzt. In Drow society, this was not so much a nurturing time as an indoctrinating time. The child had to learn basic motor and language skills, as did children of all the intelligent races. But a Drow elf also had to be grilled on the precepts that bound the chaotic society together. In the case of a male child such as Drizzt, Vierna spent hour after endless hour reminding him that he was inferior to the Drow females. Since almost all of this portion of Drizzt's life was spent in the family chapel, he encountered no males except during times of communal worship. Even when all in the house gathered for the unholy ceremonies, Drizzt remained silent at Vierna's side, with his gaze obediently on the floor. When Drizzt was old enough to follow commands, Vierna's workload lessened. Still, she spent many hours teaching her younger brother. Presently, they were working on the intricate facial, hand, and body movements of the silent code. Often, though, she just sat Drizzt about the endless task of cleaning the domed chapel. The room was barely a fifth the size of the great hall in House Baenri, but it could hold all the dark elves of House Do'Urden with 100 seats to spare. Being a wean mother was not so bad now, Vierna thought, but still she wished that she could devote more of her time to her studies. If Matron Malice had appointed Maya to the task of rearing the child, Vierna might already have been ordained as a high priestess. Vierna still had another 5 years in her duties with Drizzt. Maya might attain high priestesshood before her. Vierna dismissed that possibility. She could not afford to worry about such problems. She would finish her tenure as Ween Mother in just a few short years. On or around his 10th birthday, Drizzt would be appointed Page Prince of the family and would serve all the household equally. If her work with Drizzt did not disappoint Matron Malice, Vierna knew that she would get her due. "Go up the wall," Vierna instructed. "Tend to that statue." She pointed to the sculpture of a naked drow female about 20 feet from the floor. Young Drizzt looked up at it, confused. He couldn't possibly climb up to the sculpture and wipe it clean while holding any secure perch. Drizzt knew the high price of disobedience, though, even of hesitation, and he reached up, searching for his first handhold. "Not like that," Vierna scolded. "How?" Drizzt dared to ask, for he had no idea of what his sister was hinting at. "Wheel yourself up to the gargoyle," Vierna explained. Drizzt's small face crinkled in confusion. "You are a noble of House Do'Urden," Vierna shouted at him. "Or at least you will one day earn that distinction. In your neck purse you possess the emblem of the house, an item of considerable magic." Vierna still wasn't certain if Drizzt was ready for such a task. Levitation was a high manifestation of innate drow magic, certainly more difficult than limning the objects in fairy fire or summoning globes of darkness. The Do'Urden emblem heightened these innate powers of drow elves, magic that usually emerged as a drow matured. Whereas most drow nobles could summon the magical energy to levitate once every day or so, the nobles of House Do'Urden, with their insignia tool, could do so repeatedly. Normally, Vierna would never have tried this on a male child younger than 10, but Drizzt had shown her so much potential in the last couple of years that she saw no harm in the attempt. "Just put yourself in line with the statue," she explained, "and will yourself to rise." Drizzt looked up at the female carving, then lined his feet just out in front of the thing's angled and delicate face. He put a hand to his collar, trying to attune himself to the emblem. He had sensed before that the magic coin possessed some type of power, but it was only a raw sensation, a child's intuition. Now that Drizzt had some focus and confirmation to his suspicions, he clearly felt the vibrations of magical energy. A series of deep breaths cleared distracting thoughts from the young drow's mind. He blocked out the other sights of the room. All he saw was the statue. He felt himself grow lighter. His heels went up, and he was on one toe, though he felt no weight upon it. Drizzt looked over at Vierna, his smile wide in amazement. Then he tumbled to a heap. "Foolish male," Vierna scolded. "Try again. Try 1,000 times if you must." She reached for the snake-headed whip on her belt. "If you fail—" Drizzt looked away from her, cursing himself. His own elation had caused the spell to falter. He knew that he could do it now, though, and he was not afraid of being beaten. He concentrated again on the sculpture and let the magical energy gather within his body. Vierna, too, knew that Drizzt would eventually succeed. His mind was keen, as sharp as any Vierna had ever known, including those of the other females in House Do'Urden. The child was stubborn. Drizzt would not let the magic break him. She knew he would stand under the sculpture until he fainted from hunger. Vierna watched him go through a series of small successes and failures, the last one dropping Drizzt from a height of nearly 10 feet. Vierna flinched, wondering if he was seriously hurt. Drizzt, whatever his wounds, did not cry out, but moved back into position and started concentrating all over again. He is young for that, came a comment from behind Vienna. She turned in her seat to see Brisa standing over her, a customary scowl on the older sister's face. Perhaps, Vienna replied. But I'll not know until I let him try. Whip him when he fails, suggested, pulling her cruel six-headed instrument. She gave the whip a loving look, as if it were some sort of pet, and let a snake's head writhe about her neck and face. Inspiration. Put it away, Vienna retorted. Drizzt is mine to rear, and I need no help from you. You should watch how you speak to a high priestess, Brisa warned, and all of the snakeheads, extensions of her thoughts, turned menacingly toward Vienna. As Matron Malice will watch how you interfere with my tasks, Vienna was quick to reply. Brisa put her whip away at the mention of Matron Malice. Your tasks, she echoed scornfully. You are too yielding for such a chore. Male children must be disciplined. They must be taught their place. Realizing that Vienna's threat held dire consequences, the older sister turned and left. Vienna let Brisa have the last word. The wean mother looked back to Drizzt, still trying to get up to the statue. Enough, she ordered, recognizing that the child was tiring. He could barely get his feet off the ground. I will do it, Drizzt snapped back at her. Vienna liked his determination, but not the tone of his reply. Perhaps there was some truth to Brisa's words. Vienna snapped the snake-headed whip from her belt. A little inspiration might go a long way. Vienna sat in the chapel the next day, watching Drizzt hard at work polishing the statue of the naked female. He had levitated the full 20 feet in his first attempt this day. Vienna could not help but be disappointed when Drizzt did not look back to her and smile at the success. She saw him now, hovering up in the air, his hands a blur as they worked the brushes. Most vividly of all, though, Vienna saw the scars on her brother's naked back, the legacy of their inspirational discussion. In the infrared spectrum, the whip lines showed clearly, trails of warmth where the insulating layers of skin had been stripped away. Vienna understood the gain in beating a child, particularly a male child. Few drow males ever raised a weapon against a female, unless under the order of some other female. How much do we lose? Vienna wondered aloud. What more could one such as Drizzt become? When she heard the words spoken aloud, Vienna quickly brushed the blasphemous thoughts from her mind. She aspired to become a high priestess of the Spider Queen, Lolth the Merciless. Such thoughts were not in accord with the rules of her station. She cast an angry glare on her little brother, transferring her guilt, and again took out her instrument of punishment. She would have to whip Drizzt again this day, for the sacrilegious thoughts he had inspired within her. So the relationship continued for another 5 years, with Drizzt learning the basic lessons of life in Drow society while endlessly cleaning the chapel of House Do'Urden. Beyond the supremacy of female Drow, a lesson always accentuated by the wicked snake-headed whip, the most compelling lessons were those concerning the surface elves, the Feyre. Evil empires often bound themselves in webs of hate toward fabricated enemies, and none in the history of the world were better at it than the Drow. From the first day they were able to understand the spoken word, Drow children were taught that whatever was wrong in their lives could be blamed on the surface elves. Whenever the fangs of Vienna's whip sliced into Drizzt's back, he cried out for the death of a fairy. Conditioned hatred was rarely a rational emotion. Part 2. The weapon. Empty hours, empty days. I find that I have few memories of that first period of my life. Those first 16 years when I labored as a servant. Minutes blended into hours, hours into days, and so on, until the whole of it seemed one long and barren moment. Several times I managed to slip onto the balcony of House Do'Urden and look out over the magical lights of Menzoberranzan. On all of those 6 years, I found myself entranced by the growing and dissipating heat light of Narbondale, the time of looking back on that night, on those long hours, watching the glow of the wizard's fire slowly walk its way up and down the pillar, I am amazed at the emptiness of my early days. I clearly remember my excitement, tingling excitement, each time I got out of the house and set myself into position to observe it. Such a simple thing it was, yet so fulfilling compared to the rest of my existence. Whenever I hear the crack of a whip, another memory, more a sensation than a memory actually, sends a shiver through my spine. The shocking jolt and the ensuing numbness from those snake-headed weapons is not something that any person would soon forget. They bite under your skin, sending waves of magical energy through your body, waves that make your muscles snap and pull beyond their limits. Yet I was luckier than most. My sister Vierna was near to becoming a high priestess when she was assigned the task of rearing me, and was at a period of her life where she possessed far more energy than such a job required. Perhaps, then, there was more to those first 10 years under her care than I now recall. Vierna never showed the intense wickedness of our mother, or more particularly of our oldest sister, Breeza. Perhaps there were good times in the solitude of the house chapel. It is possible that Vierna allowed a more gentle side of herself to show through to her baby brother. Maybe not. Even though I count Vierna as the kindest of my sisters, her words drip in the venom of Lolth as surely as those of any cleric in Menzoberranzan. It seems unlikely that she would risk her aspirations toward high priestesshood for the sake of a mere child, a mere male child. Whether there were indeed joys in those years, obscured in the unrelenting assault of Menzoberranzan's wickedness, or whether that earliest period of my life was even more painful than the years that followed, so painful that my mind hides the memories, I cannot be certain. For all my efforts, I cannot remember them. I have more insight into the next 6 years, but the most prominent recollection of the days I spent serving the court of Matron Malice, aside from the secret trips outside the house, is the image of my own feet. A page prince is never allowed to raise his gaze. Drizzt Do'Urden. 6. 2 hands. Drizzt promptly answered the call to his matron mother's side, not needing the whip Breeza used to hurry him along. How often he had felt the sting of that dreaded weapon. Drizzt held no thoughts of revenge against his vicious older sister. With all of the conditioning he had received, he feared the consequences of striking her, or any female, far too much to entertain such notions. "Do you know what this day marks?" Malice asked him as he arrived at the side of her great throne in the chapel's darkened anteroom. "No, matron mother," Drizzt answered, unconsciously keeping his gaze on his toes. A resigned sigh rose in his throat as he noticed the unending view of his own feet. There had to be more to life than black stone and 10 wiggling toes, he thought. He slipped one foot out of his low boot and began doodling on the stone floor. Body heat left discernible tracings in the infrared spectrum, and Drizzt was quick and agile enough to complete simple drawings before the initial lines had cooled. 16 years, Matron Malice said to him. "You have breathed the air of Menzoberranzan for 16 years. An important period of your life has passed." Drizzt did not react, did not see any importance or significance to the declaration. His life was an unending and unchanging routine. One day, 16 years, what difference did it make? If his mother considered important the things he had been put through since his earliest recollections, Drizzt shuddered to think of what the next decades might hold. He had nearly completed his picture of a round-shouldered drow, Breeza, being bitten on the behind by an enormous viper. "Look at me," Matron Malice commanded. Drizzt felt at a loss. His natural tendency once had been to look upon a person with whom he was talking, but Breeza had wasted no time in beating that instinct out of him. The place of a page prince was servitude, and the only eyes a page prince's were worthy of meeting were those of the creatures that scurried across the stone floor. Except the eyes of a spider, of course. Drizzt had to avert his gaze whenever one of the 8-legged things crawled into his vision. Spiders were too good for the likes of a page prince. "Look at me," Malice said again, her tone hinting at volatile impatience. Drizzt had witnessed the explosions before, a wrath so incredibly vile that it swept aside anything and everything in its path. Even Breeza, so pompous and cruel, ran for hiding when the matron mother grew angry. Drizzt forced his gaze up tentatively, scanning his mother's black robes, using the familiar spider pattern along the garment's back and sides to judge the angle of his gaze. He fully expected, as every inch passed, a smack on his head or a lashing on his back. Breeza was behind him, always with her snake-headed whip near her anxious hand. Then he saw her, the mighty Matron Malice Do'Urden, her heat-sensing eyes flashing red and her face cool, not flushed with angry heat. Drizzt kept tense, still expecting a punishing blow. "Your tenure as page prince is ended," Malice explained. "You are second boy of House Do'Urden now, and are accorded all the—" Drizzt's gaze unconsciously slipped back to the floor. "Look at me!" his mother screamed in sudden rage. Terrified, Drizzt snapped his gaze back to her face, which now was glowing a hot red. On the edge of his vision, he saw the wavering heat of Malice's swinging hand, though he was not foolish enough to try to dodge the blow. He was on the floor then, the side of his face bruised. Even in the fall, though, Drizzt was alert and wise enough to keep his gaze locked onto that of Matron Malice. "No more a servant," the matron mother roared. "To continue acting like one would bring disgrace to our family." She grabbed Drizzt by the throat and dragged him roughly to his feet. "If you dishonor House Do'Urden," she promised, her face an inch from his, "I will put needles into your purple eyes." Drizzt didn't blink. In the 6 years since Vierna had relinquished care of him, putting him into general servitude to all the family, he had come to know Matron Malice well enough to understand all of the subtle connotations of her threats. She was his mother, or whatever that was worth, but Drizzt did not doubt that she would enjoy sticking needles in his eyes. "This one is different," Vierna said, in more than the shade of his eyes. "In what way, then?" Zaknafein asked, trying to keep his curiosity at a professional level. Zack had always liked Vierna better than the others, but she recently had been ordained a high priestess, and had since become too eager for her own good. Vierna slowed the pace of her gait. The door to the chapel's antechamber was in sight now. "It is hard to say," she admitted. "Drizzt is as intelligent as any male child I have ever known. He could levitate by the age of 5. Yet after he became the page prince, it took 10 days of punishment to teach him the duty of keeping his gaze to the floor, as if such a simple act ran unnaturally counter to his constitution." Zaknafein paused, and let Vierna move ahead of him. "Unnatural?" he whispered under his breath. Considering the implications of Vierna's observations, unusual perhaps for a drow, but exactly what Zaknafein would expect and hope for from a child of his loins. He moved behind Vierna into the lightless anteroom. Malice, as always, sat in her throne at the head of the spider idol, but all the other chairs in the room had been moved to the walls, even though the entire family was present. This was to be a formal meeting, Zack realized, for only the matron mother was accorded the comfort of a seat. "Matron Malice," Vierna began in her most reverent voice, "I present to you Zaknafein, as you requested." Zack moved up beside Vierna and exchanged nods with Malice, but he was more intent on the youngest Do'Urden, standing naked to the waist at the matron mother's side. Malice held up one hand to silence the others, then motioned for Breeza, holding a house Powafwi, to continue. An expression of elation brightened Drizzt's childish face as Breeza, chanting through the appropriate incantations, placed the magical cloak, black and shot with streaks of purple and red, over his shoulders. "Greetings, Zaknafein Do'Urden," Drizzt said heartily, drawing stunned looks from all in the room. Matron Malice had not granted him privilege to speak. He hadn't even asked her permission. "I am Drizzt, second boy of House Do'Urden, no more the Page Prince. I can look at you now. I mean at your eyes and not your boots. Mother told me so." Drizzt's smile disappeared when he looked up at the burning scowl of Matron Malice. Vienna stood as if turned to stone, her jaw hanging open and her eyes wide in disbelief. Zack, too, was amazed, but in a different manner. He brought a hand up to pinch his lips together, to prevent them from spreading into a smile that would have inevitably erupted into belly-shaking laughter. Zack couldn't remember the last time he had seen the matron mother's face so very bright. Breeza, in her customary position behind Malice, fumbled with her whip, too confounded by her young brother's actions to even know what in the nine hells she should do. This was a first, Zack knew, for Malice's eldest daughter rarely hesitated when punishment was in order. At the matron's side, but now prudently a step farther away, Drizzt quieted and stood perfectly still, biting down on his bottom lip. Zack could see, though, that the smile remained in the young drow's eyes. Drizzt's informality and disrespect of station had been more than an unconscious slip of the tongue, and more than the innocence of inexperience. The weapons master took a long step forward to deflect the matron mother's attention from Drizzt. "Second boy?" he asked, sounding impressed, both for the sake of Drizzt's swelling pride and to placate and distract Malice. "Then it is time for you to train." Malice let her anger slip away, a rare event. "Only the basics at your hands, Acnafane. If Drizzt is to replace Nalfane, his place at the academy will be in Sorcerer. Thus the bulk of his preparation will fall upon Risen and his knowledge, limited though it may be, of the magical arts." "Are you so certain that wizardry is his lot, matron?" Zack was quick to ask. "He appears intelligent," Malice replied. She shot an angry glare at Drizzt. "At least some of the time. Vienna reported great progress with his command of the innate powers. Our house needs a new wizard." Malice snarled reflexively, reminded of Matron Behenry's pride in her wizard son, the archmage of the city. It had been 16 years since Malice's meeting with the first matron mother of Menzo Baranzon, but she had never forgotten even the tiniest detail of that encounter. "Sorcerer seems the natural course." Zack took a flat coin from his neck purse, flipped it into a spin, and snatched it out of the air. "Might we see?" he asked. "As you will," Malice agreed, not surprised at Zack's desire to prove her wrong. Zack placed little value in wizardry, preferring the hilt of a blade to the crystal rod component of a lightning bolt. Zack moved to stand before Drizzt and handed him the coin. "Flip it." Drizzt shrugged, wondering what this vague conversation between his mother and the weapons master was all about. Until now, he had heard nothing of any future profession being planned for him, or of this place called Sorcerer.
Wait 1 second, I'm gonna be right
shrug
back.
of his shoulders, he slid the coin onto his curled index finger and snapped it into the air with his thumb, easily catching it. He then held it back out to Zack and gave the weapons master a confused look, as if to ask what was so important about such an easy task. Instead of taking the coin, the weapons master pulled another from his neck purse. "Try both hands," he said to Drizzt, handing it to him. Drizzt shrugged again, and in one easy motion put the coins up and caught them. Zack turned an eye on Matron Malice. Any drow could have performed that feat, but the ease with which this one executed the catch was a pleasure to observe. Keeping a sly eye on the matron, Zack produced 2 more coins. "Stack 2 on each hand and send all 4 up together," he instructed Drizzt. 4 coins went up. 4 coins were caught. The only parts of Drizzt's body that had even flinched were his arms. "2 hands," Zack said to Malice. "This one is a fighter. He belongs in Melee MacVeer." "I have seen wizards perform such feats," Malice retorted, not pleased by the look of satisfaction on the troublesome weapons master's face. Zack once had been Malice's proclaimed husband, and quite often since that distant time she took him as her lover. His skills and agility were not confined to the use of weapons. But along with the pleasures that Zaknafein gave to Malice, sensual skills that had prompted Malice to spare Zak's life on more than a dozen occasions, came a multitude of headaches. He was the finest weapons master in Menzoberranzan, another fact that Malice could not ignore. But his disdain, even contempt for the Spider Queen, had often landed House Do'Urden into trouble. Zak handed 2 more coins to Drizzt. Now enjoying the game, Drizzt put them into motion. 6 went up, 6 came down, the correct 3 landing in each hand. 2 hands, Zak said more emphatically. Matron Malice motioned for him to continue, unable to deny the grace of her youngest son's display. "Could you do it again?" Zak asked Drizzt. With each hand working independently, Drizzt soon had the coins stacked atop his index fingers, ready to flip. Zak stopped him there and pulled out 4 more coins, building each of the piles 5 high. Zak paused a moment to study the concentration of the young drow, and also to keep his hands over the coins and ensure that they were brightened enough by the warmth of his body heat for Drizzt to properly see them in their flight. "Catch them all, second boy," he said in all seriousness. "Catch them all, or you will land in Sorcerer, the school of magic. That is not where you belong." Drizzt still had only a vague idea of what Zak was talking about, but he could tell from the weapons master's intensity that it must be important. He took a deep breath to steady himself, then snapped the coins up. He sorted their glow quickly, discerning each individual item. The first 2 fell easily into his hands, but Drizzt saw that the scattering pattern of the rest would not drop them so readily in line. Drizzt exploded into action, spinning a complete circle, his hands an indecipherable blur of motion. Then he straightened suddenly and stood before Zak. His hands were in fists at his sides, and a grim look lay on his face. Zak and Matron Malice exchanged glances, neither quite sure of what had happened. Drizzt held his fists out to Zak, and slowly opened them, a confident smile widening across his childish face. 5 coins in each hand. Zak blew a silent whistle. It had taken him, the weapons master of the house, a dozen tries to complete that maneuver with 10 coins. He walked over to Matron Malice. 2 hands, he said a 3rd time. "He is a fighter, and I am out of coins." "How many could he do?" Malice breathed, obviously impressed in spite of herself. "How many could we stack?" Zaknafein shot back with a triumphant smile. Matron Malice chuckled out loud and shook her head. She had wanted Drizzt to replace Nalfane as the house wizard, but her stubborn weapons master had, as always, deflected her course. "Very well, Zaknafein," she said, admitting her defeat. "The second boy is a fighter." Zak nodded and started back to Drizzt. "Perhaps one day soon to be the weapons master of House Do'Urden," Matron Malice added to Zak's back. Her sarcasm stopped Zak short, and he eyed her over his shoulder. "With this one," Matron Malice continued wryly, pushing back the upper hand with her usual lack of shame, "could we expect anything less?" Risen, the present patron of the family, shifted uncomfortably. He knew, and so did everyone, even the slaves of House Do'Urden, that Drizzt was not his child. 3 rooms? Drizzt asked, when he and Zak entered the large training hall at the southernmost end of the Do'Urden complex. Balls of multicolored magical light had been spaced along the length of the high-ceilinged stone room, basking the entirety in a comfortably dim glow. The hall had only 3 doors, one to the east, which led to an outer chamber that opened onto the balcony of the house, one directly across from Drizzt, on the south wall, leading into the last room in the house, and the one from the main hallway that they had just passed through. Drizzt knew from the many locks Zak was now fastening behind them that he wouldn't often be going back that way. 1 room, Zak corrected. "But 2 more doors," Drizzt reasoned, looking out across the room, "with no locks." "Ah," Zak corrected. "Their locks are made of common sense." Drizzt was beginning to get the picture. "That door," Zak continued, pointing to the south, "opens into my private chambers. You do not ever want me to find you in there. The other one leads to the tactics room, reserved for times of war. When, if, you ever prove yourself to my satisfaction, I might invite you to join me there. That day is years away, so consider this single magnificent hall. He swept his arm out in a wide arc. Your home. Drizzt looked around, not overly thrilled. He had dared to hope that he had left this kind of treatment behind him with his page prince days. This setup, though, brought him back even to before his 6 years of servitude in the house, back to that decade when he had been locked away in the family chapel with Vierna. This room wasn't even as large as the chapel, and was too tight for the likings of the spirited young drow. His next question came out as a growl. Where do I sleep? Your home, Zack answered matter-of-factly. Where do I take meals? Your home. Drizd's eyes narrowed to slits, and his face flushed in glowing heat. Where do I... he began stubbornly, determined to foil the weapons master's logic. Your home, Zack replied in the same measured and weighted timbre before Drizzt could finish the thought. Drizzt planted his feet firmly and crossed his arms over his chest. It sounds messy, he growled. It had better not be, Zack growled back. Then what is the purpose? Drizzt began. You pull me away from my mother. You will address her as Matron Malice, Zack warned. You will always address her as Matron Malice. From my mother. Zack's next interruption came not with words, but with the swing of a curled fist. Drizzt awoke about 20 minutes later. First lesson, Zack explained, casually leaning against the wall a few feet away. For your own good, you will always address her as Matron Malice. Drizzt rolled to his side and tried to prop himself up on his elbow, but found his head reeling as soon as it left the black-rugged floor. Zack grabbed him and hoisted him up. Not as easy as catching coins, the weapons master remarked. What? Parrying a blow? What blow? Just agree, you stubborn child. Second boy, Drizzt corrected, his voice again a growl, and his arms defiantly back over his chest. Zack's fist curled at his side, a not-too-subtle point that Drizzt did not miss. Do you need another nap? The weapons master asked calmly. Second boys can be children, Drizzt wisely conceded. Zack shook his head in disbelief. This was going to be interesting. You may find your time here enjoyable, he said, leading Drizzt over to a long, thick, and colorfully, though most of the colors were somber, decorated curtain. But only if you can learn some control over that wagging tongue of yours. A sharp tug sent the curtain floating down, revealing the most magnificent weapons rack the young drow, and many older drow as well, had ever seen. Polearms of many sorts, swords, axes, hammers, and every other kind of weapon Drizzt could imagine, and a whole bunch he'd never imagined, sat in an elaborate array. Examine them, Zack told him. Take your time and your pleasure. Learn which ones sit best in your hands. Follow most obediently the commands of your will. By the time we have finished, you will know every one of them as a trusted companion. Wide-eyed, Drizzt wandered along the rack, viewing the whole place and the potential of the whole experience in a completely different light. For his entire young life, 16 years, his greatest enemy had been boredom. Now it appeared, Drizzt had found weapons to fight that enemy. Zack headed for the door to his private chamber, thinking it better that Drizzt be alone in those first awkward moments of handling new weapons. The weapons master stopped, though, when he reached his door, and looked back to the young Do'Urden. Drizzt swung a long and heavy halberd, a polearm more than twice his height, in a slow arc. For all of Drizzt's attempts to keep the weapon under control, its momentum spun his tiny frame right to the ground. Zack heard himself chuckle, but his laughter only reminded him of the grim reality of his duty. He would train Drizzt, as he had trained 1,000 young dark elves before him, to be a warrior, preparing him for the trials of the academy and life in dangerous Menzoberranzan. He would train Drizzt to be a killer. How against this one's nature that mantle seemed, thought Zack. Smiles came too easily to Drizzt. The thought of him running a sword through the heart of another living being revolted Zack Nefane. That was the way of the Drow, though, a way that Zack had been unable to resist for all of his 4 centuries of life. Pulling his stare from the spectacle of Drizzt at play, Zack moved into his chamber and shut the door. "Are they all like that?" he asked into his nearly empty room. "Do all Drow children possess such innocence, such simple, untainted smiles that cannot survive the ugliness of our world?" Zack started for the small desk to the side of the room, meaning to lift the darkening shade off the continually glowing ceramic globe that served as the chamber's light source. He changed his mind as that image of Drizzt's delight with the weapons refused to diminish, and he headed instead for the large bed across from the door. "Or are you unique, Drizzt Do'Urden?" he continued as he fell onto the cushioned bed. "And if you are so different, what then is the cause? The blood? My blood that courses through your veins? Or the years you spent with your wean mother?" Zack threw an arm across his eyes and considered the many questions. Drizzt was different from the norm, he decided at length. But he didn't know whether he should thank Vierna or himself. After a while, sleep took him, but it brought the weapons master little comfort. A familiar dream visited him, a vivid memory that would never fade. Zack Nefane heard again the screams of the children of House de Vere as the Do'Urden soldiers he himself had trained, slashed at them. "This one is different," Zack cried, leaping up from his bed. He wiped the cold sweat from his face. "This one is different." He had to believe that. 7. Dark Secrets. "Do you truly mean to try?" Massage asked, his voice condescending and filled with disbelief. Alton turned his hideous glare on the student. "Direct your anger elsewhere, faceless one," Massage said, averting his gaze from his mentor's scarred visage. "I am not the cause of your frustration. The question was valid. For more than a decade, you have been a student of the magical arts," Alton replied. "Still you fear to explore the netherworld of the side of a master of Sorcerer." "I would have no fear beside a true master," Massage dared to whisper. Alton ignored the comment, as he had with so many others he had accepted from the apprenticing Hunnet over the last 16 years. Massage was Alton's only tie to the outside world, and while Massage had a powerful family, Alton had only Massage. They moved through the door into the uppermost chamber of Alton's 4-room complex. A single candle burned there, its light diminished by an abundance of dark-colored tapestries and the black hue of the room's stone and rugs.
Hey, how you
Alton
doing?
slid onto his stool at the back of the small circular table and placed a heavy book down before him.
I'm just
"It isn't
smoking a
that
little
spell
bubble
left for
hash.
clerics," Massage protested, sitting down across from the faceless master. "Wizards command the lower planes. The dead are for the clerics alone." Alton looked around curiously, then turned a frown up at Massage.
How you
The
doing,
master's
420?
grotesque features enhanced by the dancing candlelight. "It seems that I have no cleric at my call," the faceless one explained sarcastically. "Would you rather I try for another denizen of the 9 hells?" Massage rocked back in his chair and shook his head helplessly and emphatically. Alton had a point. A year before, the Faceless One had sought answers to his questions by enlisting the aid of an ice devil. The volatile thing froze the room until it shone black in the infrared spectrum and smashed a matron mother's treasure hoard worth of alchemical equipment. If Massage hadn't summoned his magical cat to distract the ice devil, neither he nor Alton would have gotten out of the room alive. "Very well, then," Massage said unconvincingly, crossing his arms in front of him on the table. "Conjure your spirit and find your answers." Alton did not dismiss the involuntary shudder belied by the ripple in Massage's robes. He glared at the student for a moment, then went back to his
Yeah,
preparations.
everyone, me and my brother,
As Alton
most
neared the
hated
time
girl,
of
are
casting,
trying to
Massage's hand
get money
instinctively
together
went into his
because
pocket, to the onyx
Our older
figurine
brother
of the
has
hunting
a...
cat he had
Well,
acquired
he
on
already
the
planned a
day
fishing
Alton
trip
had
for us,
assumed the faceless one's identity.
for all of us to
The
go
little statue was
to
enchanted with a
Ruidoso,
powerful
so
Dweomer that
me and
enabled its
Moshader are
possessor
trying
to
to
summon a mighty panther to his
get
side.
the funds together to get an
Massage had used the
Airbnb
cat
over there.
sparingly, not yet fully understanding the Dweomer's limitations and potential dangers. Only in times of need, Massage reminded himself quietly when he felt
Hell
the
yeah.
item in his hand.
I'm just
Why
smoking
was it
some
that those times kept
boba
occurring when he was
hash.
with Alton? The apprentice wondered. Despite his bravado, this time Alton privately shared
And
Massage's trepidation.
doing some
Spirits of
dabs.
the dead were not as destructive as denizens of the lower planes, but they could be equally cruel and subtler in their torments. Alton needed his answer, though. For more than a decade and a half, he had sought his information through conventional channels, inquiring of masters and students, in a roundabout manner, of course, of the details concerning the fall of House de Vere. Many knew the rumors of that eventful night. Some even detailed the battle methods used by the victorious house. None, though, would name that perpetrating house. In Menzo Berenzon, one did not utter anything resembling an accusation, even if the belief was commonly shared, without enough undeniable proof to spur the ruling council into a unified action against the accused. If a house botched a raid and was discovered, the wrath of all
Got this
Menzo
loaded,
Berenzon
but
would descend
give me
upon
1
it
second.
until the family name had been extinguished. But in the case of a successfully executed attack, such as the one that felled House de Vere, an accuser was the one most likely to wind up at the wrong end of a snake-headed whip. Public embarrassment, perhaps more than any guidelines of honor, turned the wheels of justice in the city of Drow. Alton now sought other means for the solution to his quest. First he had tried the lower planes, the Ice Devil, to disastrous effect. Now Alton had in his possession an item that could end his frustrations. A tome penned by a wizard of the surface world. In the Drow hierarchy, only the clerics of Lolth dealt with the realm of the dead. But in other societies, wizards also dabbled into the spirit world. Alton had found the book in the library of Sorcerer, and had managed to translate enough of it, he believed, to make a spiritual contact. He wrung his hands together, gingerly opened the book to the marked page, and scanned the incantation one final time. "Are you ready?" he asked Massage. "No." Alton ignored the student's unending sarcasm and placed his hands flat on the table. He slowly sunk into his deepest meditative trance. "Fey Inod." He paused and cleared his throat at the slip. Massage, though he hadn't closely examined the spell, recognized the mistake. "Fey Inunod de Min." Another pause. "Lolth be with us," Massage groaned under his breath. Alton's eyes popped wide and he glared at the student. "A translation," he growled, "from the strange language of a human wizard." "Gibberish," Massage retorted. "I have in front of me the private spellbook of a wizard from the surface world," Alton said evenly. "An archmage, according to the scribbling of the Orcan thief who stole it and sold it to our agents." He composed himself again and shook his hairless head, trying to return to the depths of his trance. "A simple, stupid orc managed to steal a spellbook from an archmage," Massage whispered rhetorically, letting the absurdity of the statement speak for itself. "The wizard was dead," Alton roared. "The book is authentic." "Who translated it?" Massage replied calmly. Alton refused to listen to any more arguments. Ignoring the smug look on Massage's face, he began again. "Fey Inunad, de Min, de Sul de Ket." Massage faded out and tried to rehearse a lesson from one of his classes, hoping that his sobs of laughter wouldn't disturb Alton. He didn't believe for a moment that Alton's attempt would prove successful, but he didn't want to screw up the fool's line of babbling again and have to suffer through the ridiculous incantation still another time. A short time later, when Massage heard Alton's excited whisper, "Matron," he quickly focused his attention on the events at hand. Sure enough, an unusual ball of green-hued smoke appeared over the candle's flame, and gradually took a more definite shape. "Matron Jennifer," Alton gasped again when the summons was complete. hovering before him was the unmistakable image of his dead mother's face. The spirit scanned the room, confused. "Who are you?" it asked at length. "I am Alton. Alton DeVere, your son." "Son?" the spirit asked. "Your child. I remember no child so very ugly." "A disguise," Alton repeated, looking back at Massage and expecting a snicker. If Massage had chided and doubted Alton before, he now showed only sincere respect. Smiling, Alton continued, "Just a disguise, that I might move about in the city and exact revenge upon our enemies." "City? Menzoberranzan, of course." Still the spirit seemed not to understand. "You are Jennifer?" Alton pressed. "Matron Jennifer DeVere?" The spirit's features contorted into a scowl as it considered the question. "I was, I think. Matron mother of House DeVere, 4th House of Menzoberranzan," Alton prompted, growing more excited. "High priestess of love." The mention of the Spider Queen sent a spark through the spirit. "Oh no," it balked. Jennifer remembered now. "You should not have done this, my ugly son." "It is just a disguise," Alton interrupted. "I must leave you," Jennifer's spirit continued, glancing around nervously.
Yep, fire in the hole.
"But I need some information from you, Matron Jennifer." "Do not call me that," the spirit shrieked. "You do not understand. I am not in Lolth's favor." "Trouble," whispered Massage.
Give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Surprised. "Just one answer," Alton demanded, refusing to let another opportunity to learn his enemy's identity slip past him. "Quickly," the spirit shrieked. "Name the house that destroyed DeVere." "The house?" Jennifer pondered. "Yes, I remember that evil night. It was house—" The ball of smoke puffed and bent out of shape, twisting Jennifer's image and sending her next words out as an indecipherable blurb. Alton leaped to his feet. "No," he screamed. "You must tell me. Who are my enemies?" "Would you count me as one?" the spirit image said, in a voice very different from the one it had used earlier. A tone of sheer power that stole the blood from Alton's face. The image twisted and transformed, became something ugly, uglier than Alton. Hideous beyond all experience on the material plane. Alton was not a cleric, of course, and he had never studied the Drow religion beyond the basic tenets taught to males of the race. He knew the creature now hovering in the air before him, though, for it appeared as an oozing, slimy stick of melted wax. A Yoclo, a handmaiden of Lolth. "You dare to disturb the torment of Jennifer?" the Yoclo snarled. "Damn," whispered Massage, sliding slowly down under the black tablecloth. Even he, with all of his doubts of Alton, had not expected his disfigured mentor to land them in trouble this serious. "But," Alton stuttered, "never again disturb this plane, feeble wizard!" the Yoclo roared. "I did not try for the abyss," Alton protested meekly. "I only meant to speak with Jennifer!" the Yoclo snarled. "Fallen priestess of Lolth! Where would you expect to find her, spirit, foolish male? Frolicking in Olympus with the false gods of the surface elves?" "I did not think—" "Do you ever?" the Yoclo growled. "Nope," Massage answered silently, careful to keep himself as far out of the way as possible. "Never again disturb this plane," the Yoclo warned a final time. "The Spider Queen is not merciful, and has no tolerance for meddling males." The creature's oozing face puffed and swelled, expanding beyond the limits of the smoky ball. Alton heard gurgling, gagging noises, and he stumbled back over his stool, putting his back flat against the wall and bringing his arms up defensively in front of his face. The Yoclo's mouth opened impossibly wide and spewed forth a hail of small objects. They ricocheted off Alton and tapped against the wall all around him. Stones? The faceless wizard wondered in confusion. One of the objects then answered his unspoken question. It caught hold of Alton's layered black robes and began crawling up toward his exposed neck. Spiders. A wave of the eight-legged beasts rushed under the little table, sending Massage tumbling out the other side in a desperate roll. He scrambled to his feet and turned back to see Alton slapping and stomping wildly, trying to get out of the main host of the crawling things. "Do not kill them!" Massage screamed. "To kill spiders is forbidden by to the 9 hells with the clerics and their laws!" Alton shrieked back. Massage shrugged in helpless agreement, reached around under the folds of his own robes, and produced the same two-handed crossbow he had used to kill the Faceless One those years ago. He considered the powerful weapon and the tiny spiders scrambling around the room. "Overkill?" he asked aloud. Hearing no answer, he shrugged again and fired. The heavy bolt knifed across Alton's shoulder, cutting a deep line. The wizard stared in disbelief, then turned an ugly grimace on Massage. "You had one on your shoulder," the student explained. Alton's scowl did not relent. "Ungrateful?" Massage snarled. "Foolish Alton, all of the spiders are on your side of the room, remember?" Massage turned to leave and called, "Good hunting," over his shoulder. He reached for the handle to the door, but as his long fingers closed around it, the portal's surface transformed into the image of Matron Ginafay. She smiled widely, too widely, and an impossibly long and wet tongue reached out and licked Massage across the face. "Alton!" he cried, spinning back against the wall, out of the slimy member's reach. He noticed the wizard in the midst of spellcasting, Alton fighting to hold his concentration as a host of spiders continued their hungry ascent up his flowing robes. "You are a dead one," Massage commented matter-of-factly, shaking his head. Alton fought through the exacting ritual of the spell, ignored his own revulsion of the crawling things, and forced the evocation to completion. In all of his years of study, Alton never would have believed he could do such a thing. He would have laughed at the mere mention of it. Now, however, it seemed a far preferable fate to the Yochl's creeping doom. He dropped a fireball at his own feet. Naked and hairless, Massage stumbled through the door and out of the inferno. The flaming, faceless master came next, diving into a roll and stripping his tattered and burning robe from his back as he went. As he watched Alton patting out the last of the flames, a pleasant memory flashed in Massage's mind, and he uttered the single lament that dominated his every thought at this disastrous moment. "I should have killed him when I had him in the web." A short time later, after Massage had gone back to his room and his studies, Alton slipped on the ornamental metallic bracers that identified him as a master of the academy and slipped outside the structure of Sorcerre. He moved to the wide and sweeping stairway leading down from Tir Bresh and sat down to take in the sights of Menzoberranzan. Even with this view, though, the city did little to distract Alton from thoughts of his latest failure. For 16 years he had forsaken all other dreams and ambitions in his desperate search to find the guilty house. For 16 years he had failed. He wondered how long he could keep up the charade and his spirits. Massage, his only friend, if Massage could be called a friend, was more than halfway through his studies at Sorcerre. What would Alton do when Massage graduated and returned to House Hannet? "Perhaps I shall carry on my toils for centuries to come," he said aloud, "only to be murdered by a desperate student, as Massage murdered the Faceless One. Might that student disfigure himself and take my place?" Alton couldn't stop the ironic chuckle that passed his lipless mouth at the notion of a perpetual, faceless master of Sorcerre. At what point would the matron mistress of the academy get suspicious? 1,000 years? 10,000? Or might the Faceless One outlive Menzoberranzan itself? Life as a master was not such a bad lot, Alton supposed. Many drow would sacrifice much to be given such an honor. Alton dropped his face into the crook of his elbow and forced away such ridiculous thoughts. He was not a real master, nor did the stolen position bring him any measure of satisfaction. Perhaps Massage should have shot him that day, 16 years ago, when Alton was trapped in the Faceless One's web. Alton's despair only deepened when he considered the actual time frame involved. He had just passed his 70th birthday and was still young by drow standards. The notion that only 1/10 of his life was behind him was not a comforting one to Alton de Vere this night. How long will I survive? He asked himself. How long until this madness that is my existence consumes me? Alton looked back out over the city. Better that the Faceless One had killed me, he whispered, for now I am Alton of no house worth mentioning. Massage had dubbed him that on the first morning after House de Vere's fall, but way back then, with his life teetering on the edge of a crossbow, Alton had not understood the title's implications. Menzoberranzan was nothing more than a collection of individual houses. A rogue commoner might latch onto one of them to call his own, but a rogue noble wouldn't likely be accepted by any house in the city. He was left with Sorcerre and nothing more, until his true identity was discovered at last. What punishments would he then face for the crime of killing a master? Massage may have committed the crime, but Massage had a house to defend him. Alton was only a rogue noble. He sat back on his elbows and watched the rising heat light of Narbondale. As the minutes became hours, Alton's despair and self-pity went through inevitable change. He turned his attention to the individual drow houses now, not to the conglomeration that bound them as a city, and he wondered what dark secrets each harbored. One of them, Alton reminded himself, held the secret he most dearly wanted to know. One of them had wiped out House de Vere. Forgotten was the night's failure with Matron Ginefé and the Yockel. Forgotten was the lament for an early death. 16 years was not so long a time, Alton decided. He had perhaps 7 centuries of life left within his slender frame. If he had to, Alton was prepared to spend every minute of those long years searching for the perpetrating house. Vengeance, he growled aloud, feeding off that audible reminder of his only reason for continuing to draw breath. 8. Kindred. Zack pressed in with a series of low thrusts. Drizzt tried to back away quickly and return to even footing, but the relentless assault followed his every step, and he was forced to keep his movements solely on the defensive. More often than not, Drizzt found the hilts of his weapons closer to Zack than the blades. Zack then dropped into a low crouch and came up under Drizzt's defense. Drizzt twirled his scimitars in a masterful cross, but he had to straighten stiffly to dodge the weapon master's equally deft assault. Drizzt knew that he had been set up, and he fully expected the next attack as Zack shifted his weight to his back leg and dived in, both sword tips aimed for Drizzt's loins. Drizzt spat a silent curse and spun his scimitars into a downward cross, meaning to use the V of his blades to catch his teacher's swords. On a sudden impulse, Drizzt hesitated as he intercepted Zack's weapons, and he jumped away instead, taking a painful slap on the inside of one thigh. Disgusted, he threw both of his scimitars to the floor. Zack, too, leaped back. He held his swords out to his sides, a look of sincere confusion on his face. "You should not have missed that move," he said bluntly. "The parry is wrong," Drizzt replied. Awaiting further explanation, Zack lowered one sword tip to the floor and leaned on the weapon. In past years, Zack had wounded, even killed students for such blatant defiance. "The cross-down defeats the attack, but to what gain?" Drizzt continued. "When the move is completed, my sword tips remain down too low for any effective attack routine, and you are able to slip back and free. But you have defeated my attack." "Only to face another," Drizzt argued. "The best position I can hope to attain from the cross-down is an even stance." "Yes?" Zack prompted, not understanding his student's problem with that scenario. "Remember your own lesson," Drizzt shouted. "Every move should bring an advantage, you preach to me, but I see no advantage in using the cross-down." "You only recite one part of that lesson for your own purpose," Zack scolded, now growing equally angry. "Complete the phrase or use it not at all. Every move should bring an advantage or take away a disadvantage. The cross-down defeats the double thrust low, and your opponent obviously has gained the advantage if he even attempts such a daring offensive maneuver. Returning to an even stance is far preferable at that moment." "The parry is wrong," Drizzt said stubbornly. "Pick up your blades," Zack growled at him, taking a threatening step forward. Drizzt hesitated, and Zack charged, his swords leading. Drizzt dropped to a crouch, snatched up the scimitars, and rose to meet the assault, while wondering if it was another lesson or a true attack. The weapons master pressed furiously, snapping off cut after cut and backing Drizzt around in circles. Drizzt defended well enough and began to notice an all-too-familiar pattern as Zack's attacks came consistently lower, again forcing the hilts of Drizzt's weapons up and out over the scimitar's blades. Drizzt understood that Zack meant to prove his point with actions, not words. Seeing the fury on Zack's face, though, Drizzt wasn't certain how far the weapons master would carry his point. If Zack proved correct in his observations, would he strike again to Drizzt's thigh, or to his heart? Zack came up and under, and Drizzt stiffened and straightened. "Double thrust low," the weapons master growled, and his swords dived in. Drizzt was ready for him. He executed the cross down, smiling smugly at the ring of metal as his scimitars crossed over the thrusting swords. Drizzt then followed through with only one of his blades, thinking he could deflect both of Zack's swords well enough in that manner. Now, with one blade free of the parry, Drizzt spun it over in a devious counter. As soon as Drizzt reversed the one hand, Zack saw the ploy, a ruse he had suspected Drizzt would try. Zack dropped one of his own sword tips, the one nearest to the hilt of Drizzt's single parrying blade, to the ground, and Drizzt, trying to maintain an even resistance and balance along the length of a blocking scimitar, lost his balance. Drizzt was quick enough to catch himself before he had stumbled too far, though his knuckles pinched into the stone of the floor. He still believed that he had Zack caught in his trap and that he could finish his brilliant counter. He took a short step forward to regain his full balance. The weapons master dropped straight down to the floor under the arc of Drizzt's swinging scimitar and spun a single circuit. Weapons master dropped straight down to the floor under the arc of Drizzt's swinging scimitar and spun a single circuit, driving his booted heel into the back of Drizzt's exposed knee. Before Drizzt had even realized the attack, he found himself lying flat on his back. Zack abruptly broke his own momentum and threw his feet back under him. Before Drizzt could begin to understand the dizzying counter-counter, he found the weapons master standing over him, with the tip of Zack's sword painfully and pointedly drawing a tiny drop of blood from his throat. "Have you anything more to say?" Zack growled. "The parry is wrong," Drizzt answered. Zack's laughter erupted from his belly. He threw his sword to the ground, reached down, and pulled the stubborn young student to his feet. He calmed quickly, his gaze finding that of Drizzt's lavender orbs as he pushed the student out to arm's length. Zack marveled at the ease of Drizzt's stance, the way he held the twin scimitars almost as if they were a natural extension of his arms. Drizzt had been in training only a few months, but already he had mastered the use of nearly every weapon in the vast armory of House Do'Urden. Those scimitars, Drizzt's chosen weapons, with curving blades that enhanced the dizzying flow of the young fighter's sweeping battle style. With those scimitars in hand, this young drow, barely more than a child, could outfight half the members of the academy, and a shiver tingled through Zack's spine when he pondered just how magnificent Drizzt would become after years of training. It was not just the physical abilities and potential of Drizzt Do'Urden that made Zack Nefane pause and take note, however. Zack had come to realize that Drizzt's temperament was indeed different from that of the average drow. Drizzt possessed a spirit of innocence and lacked any maliciousness. Zack couldn't help but feel proud when he looked upon Drizzt. In all manners, the young drow held to the same principles, morals so unusual in Menzo Baranzan, as Zack. Drizzt had recognized the connection as well, though he had no idea of how unique his and Zack's shared perceptions were in the evil drow world. He realized that Uncle Zack was different from any of the other dark elves he had come to know, though that included only his own family and a few dozen of the house soldiers. Certainly Zack was much different from Briza, Drizzt's oldest sister, with her zealous, almost blind ambitions in the mysterious religion of Lolth. Certainly Zack was different from Matron Malice, Drizzt's mother, who seemed never to say anything at all to Drizzt unless it was a command for service. Zack was able to smile at situations that didn't necessarily bring pain to anyone. He was the first drow Drizzt had met who was apparently content with his station in life. Zack was the first drow Drizzt had ever heard laugh. "A good try," the weapons master conceded of Drizd's failed counter. "In a real battle, I would have been dead," Drizzt replied. "Surely," said Zack, "but that is why we train. Your plan was masterful, your timing perfect. Only the situation was wrong. Still, I will say it was a good try." "You expected it," said the student. Zack smiled and nodded. "That is, perhaps, because I had seen the maneuver attempted by another student." "Against you?" Drizzt asked, feeling a little less special now that he knew his battle insights were not so unique. "Hardly," Zack replied with a wink. "I watched the counter fail from the same angle as you, to the same result." Drizd's face brightened. "We think alike," he commented. "We do," said Zack, "but my knowledge has been increased by 4 centuries of experience, while you have not even lived through a score of years. Trust me, my eager student. The cross down is the correct parry." "Perhaps," Drizzt replied. Zack hid a smile. "When you find a better counter, we shall try it. But until then, trust my word. I have trained more soldiers than I can count, all the army of House de Werden and 10 times that number when I served as a master in Melee MacVeer. I taught Risen, all of your sisters, and both of your brothers." "Both?" Zack paused and shot a curious glance at Drizzt. "I see," he said after a moment. "They never bothered to tell you." Zack wondered if it was his place to tell Drizzt the truth. He doubted that Matron would care either way. She probably hadn't told Drizzt simply because she hadn't considered the story of Nalthane's death worth telling. "Yes, both," Zack decided to explain. "You had 2 brothers when you were born. Dinan, whom you know, and an older one, Nalthane, a wizard of considerable power. Nalthane was killed in battle on the very night you drew your first breath." "Against dwarves or vicious gnomes?" Drizzt squeaked, as wide-eyed as a child begging for a frightening bedtime story. "Was he defending the city from evil conquerors or rogue monsters?" Zack had a hard time reconciling the warped perceptions of Drizd's innocent beliefs. "Bury the young in lies," he lamented under his breath. But to Drizzt he answered, "No." "Then against some opponent more foul?" Drizzt pressed. "Wicked elves from the surface?" "He died at the hands of a drow," Zack snapped in frustration, stealing the eagerness from Drizd's shining eyes. Drizzt slumped back to consider the possibilities, and Zack could hardly bear to watch the confusion that twisted his young face. "War with another city?" Drizzt asked somberly. "I did not know." Zack let it go at that. He turned and moved silently toward his private chamber. Let Malice or one of her lackeys destroy Drizd's innocent logic. Behind him, Drizzt held his next line of questions in check, understanding that the conversation and the lesson was at an end. Understanding, too, that something important had just transpired. The weapons master battled Drizzt through long hours, as the days blended into 10 days, and the 10 days into months. Time became unimportant. They fought until exhaustion overwhelmed them, and went back to the training floor again as soon as they were able. By the 3rd year, at the age of 19, Drizzt was able to hold out for hours against the weapons master, even taking the offensive in many of their contests. Zack enjoyed these days. For the first time in many years, he had met one with the potential to become his fighting equal. For the first time that Zack could ever remember, laughter often accompanied the clash of adamantine weapons in the training room. He watched Drizzt grow tall and straight, attentive, eager, and intelligent. The masters of the academy would be hard put just to hold a stalemate against Drizzt, even in his first year. That thought thrilled the weapons master only as long as it took him to remember the principles of the academy, the precepts of drow life, and what they would do to his wonderful student, how they would steal that smile from Drizd's lavender eyes. A pointed reminder of that drow world outside the practice room visited them one day in the person of Matron Malice. "Address her with proper respect," Zack warned Drizzt when Maya announced the matron mother's entrance. The weapons master prudently moved out a few steps to greet the head of House de Werden privately. "My greetings, matron," he said with a low bow. "To what do I owe the honor of your presence?" Matron Malice laughed at him, seeing through his facade.
"So much time do you and my son spend in here," she came. "I came to witness the benefit to the boy."
"He is a fine fighter," Zack assured her.
"He will have to be," Malice muttered. "He goes to the academy in only a year."
Zack narrowed his eyes at her doubting words and growled, "The academy has never seen a finer swordsman." The matron walked away from him to stand before Drizzt.
"I doubt not your prowess with the blade," she said to Drizzt, though she shot a sly gaze back at Zack as she spoke the words. "You have the proper blood. There are other qualities that make up a drow warrior, qualities of the heart, the attitude of a warrior."
Drizzt didn't know how to respond to her. He had seen her only a few times in all of the last 3 years, and they had exchanged no words. Zack saw the confusion on Drizd's face, and feared that the boy would slip up, precisely what Matron Malice wanted. Then Malice would have an excuse to pull Drizzt out of Zack's tutelage, dishonoring Zack in the process, and give him over to Dinan or some other passionless killer. Zack may have been the finest instructor with a blade, but now that Drizzt had learned the use of weapons, Malice wanted him emotionally hardened. Zack couldn't risk it. He valued his time with young Drizzt too much. He pulled his swords from their jeweled scabbards and charged right by Matron Malice, yelling, "Show her, young warrior!" Drizd's eyes became burning flames at the approach of his wild instructor. His scimitars came into his hands as quickly as if he had willed them to appear. It was a good thing they had. Zack came in on Drizzt with a fury that the young drow had never before seen, more so even than the time Zack had shown Drizzt the value of the cross-down parry. Sparks flew as sword rang against scimitar, and Drizzt found himself driven back, both of his arms already aching from the thudding force of the heavy blows. "What are you—" Drizzt tried to ask. "Show her," Zack growled, slamming in again and again. Drizzt barely dodged one cut that surely would have killed him. Still, confusion kept his moves purely defensive. Zack slapped one of Drizd's scimitars, then the other, out wide, and used an unexpected weapon, bringing his foot straight up in front of him and slamming his heel into Drizd's nose. Drizzt heard the crackle of cartilage and felt the warmth of his own blood running freely down his face. He dived back into a roll, trying to keep a safe distance from his crazed opponent until he could realign his senses. From his knees he saw Zack a short distance away and approaching. "Show her!" Zack growled angrily with every determined step. The purple flames of fairy fire limned Drizd's skin, making him an easier target. He responded the only way he could. He dropped a globe of darkness over himself and Zack. Sensing the weapons master's next move, Drizzt dropped to his belly and scrambled out, keeping his head low, a wise choice. At his first realization of the darkness, Zack had quickly levitated up about 10 feet and rolled right over, sweeping his blades down to Drizd's face level. When Drizzt came clear of the other side of the darkened globe, he looked back and saw only the lower half of Zack's legs. He didn't need to watch anything more to understand the weapons master's deadly blind attacks. Zack would have cut him apart if he had not dropped low in the blackness. Anger replaced confusion. When Zack dropped from his magical perch and came rushing back out the front of the globe, Drizzt let his rage lead him back into the fight. He spun a pirouette just before he reached Zack, his lead scimitar cutting a gracefully arcing line, and his other following in a deceptively sharp stab straight over that line. Zack dodged the thrusting point and put a backhand block on the other. Drizzt wasn't finished. He set his thrusting blade into a series of short, wicked pokes that kept Zack on the retreat for a dozen steps and more, back into the conjured darkness. They now had to rely on their incredibly keen sense of hearing and their instincts. Zack finally managed to regain a foothold, but Drizzt immediately set his own feet into action, kicking away whenever the balance of his swinging blades allowed for it. One foot even slipped through Zack's defenses, blasting the breath from the weapons master's lungs. They came back out the side of the globe, and Zack, too, glowed in the outline of fairy fire. The weapons master felt sickened by the hatred etched on his young student's face, but he realized that this time, neither he nor Drizzt had been given a choice in the matter. This fight had to be ugly, had to be real. Gradually, Zack settled into an easy rhythm, solely defensive, and let Drizzt, in his explosive fury, wear himself down. Drizzt played on and on, relentless and tireless.
Zack coaxed him by letting him see openings where there were none, and Drizzt was always quick to oblige, launching a thrust, cut, or kick. Matron Malice watched the spectacle silently. She couldn't deny the measure of training Zack had given her son. Drizzt was, physically, more than ready for battle. Zack knew that, to Matron Malice, sheer skill with weapons might not be enough. Zack had to keep Malice from conversing with Drizzt for any length of time. She would not approve of her son's attitudes. Drizzt was tiring now, Zack could see, though he recognized the weariness in his student's arms to be partly deception. "Go with it," he muttered silently, and he suddenly twisted his ankle, his right arm flailing out wide and low as he struggled for balance, opening a hole in his defenses that Drizzt could not resist. The expected thrust came in a flash, and Zack's left arm streaked in a short crosscut that slapped the scimitar right out of Drizzt's hand. "Ha!" Drizzt called, having expected the move and launching his second ruse. His remaining scimitar knifed over Zack's left shoulder, inevitably dipping in the follow-through of the parry. But by the time Drizzt even launched the second blow, Zack was already down to his knees. As Drizzt's blade cut harmlessly high, Zack sprang to his feet and launched a right cross, hilt first, that caught Drizzt squarely in the face. A stunned Drizzt leaped back a long step and stood perfectly still for a long moment. His remaining scimitar dropped to the ground, and his glossed eyes did not blink. "A feint within a feint within a feint," Zack calmly explained. Drizzt slumped to the floor, unconscious. Matron Malice nodded her approval as Zack walked back over to her. "He is ready for the academy," she remarked. Zack's face turned sour, and he did not answer. "Vienna is already there," Malice continued, "to teach as a mistress in Eric Tinolith, the school of Lolth. It is a high honor." A laurel for House Do'Urden, Zack knew, but he was smart enough to keep his thoughts silent. "Dinan will leave soon," said the matron. Zack was surprised. 2 children serving as masters in the academy at the same time? "You must have worked hard to get such accommodations," he dared to remark. Matron Malice smiled. "Favors owed, favors called in." "To what end?" asked Zack. "Protection for Drizzt?" Malice laughed aloud. "From what I have just witnessed, Drizzt would more likely protect the other 2. Zack bit his lip at the comment. Dinan was still twice the fighter, and 10 times the heartless killer as Drizzt. Zack knew that Malice had other motives. 3 of the first 8 houses will be represented by no fewer than 4 children in the academy over the next 2 decades, Matron Malice admitted. Matron Baenri's own son will begin in the same class as Drizzt. "So you have aspirations," Zack said. "How high, then, will House Do'Urden climb under the guidance of Matron Malice?" "Sarcasm will cost you your tongue," the matron mother warned. "We would be fools to let slip by such an opportunity to learn more of our rivals." "The first 8 houses," Zack mused. "Be cautious, Matron Malice. Do not forget to watch for rivals among the lesser houses. There once was a house named De Vere that made such a mistake." "No attack will come from behind," Malice sneered. "We are the 9th house, but boast more power than but a handful of others. None will strike at our backs. There are easier targets higher up the line." "And all to our gain," Zack put in. "That is the point of it all, is it not?" Malice asked, her evil smile wide on her face. Zack didn't need to respond. The matron knew his true feelings. That precisely was not the point. "Speak less, and your jaw will heal faster," Zack said later, when he again was alone with Drizzt. Drizzt cast him a vile glance. The weapons master shook his head. "We have become great friends," he said. "So I had thought," mumbled Drizzt. "Then think clearly," Zack scolded. "Do you believe that Matron Malice would approve of such a bonding between her weapons master and her youngest, and her prized youngest son? You are a drow, Drizzt Do'Urden, and of noble birth. You may have no friends." Drizzt straightened, as if he had been slapped in the face. "None openly, at least," Zack conceded, laying a comforting hand on the youngster's shoulder. "Friends equate to vulnerability. inexcusable vulnerability. Matron Malice would never accept. He paused, realizing that he was browbeating his student. Well, he admitted in quiet conclusion, at least we two know who we are. Somehow, to Drizzt, that just didn't seem enough. 9. Families. Come quickly, Zack instructed Drizzt one evening after they had finished their sparring. By the urgency of the weapons master's tone, and by the fact that Zack didn't even pause to wait for Drizzt, Drizzt knew that something important was happening. He finally caught up to Zack on the balcony of House Do'Urden, where Maya and Briza already stood. "What is it?" Drizzt asked. Zack pulled him close and pointed out across the great cavern to the northeastern reaches of the city. Lights flashed and faded in sudden bursts. A pillar of fire rose into the air, then disappeared. "A raid," Briza said offhandedly. "Minor houses, and of no concern to us." Zack saw that Drizzt did not understand. "One house has attacked another," he explained. "Revenge, perhaps, but most likely an attempt to climb to a higher rank in the city." "The battle has been long," Briza remarked, "and still the lights flash." Zack continued to clarify the event for the confused second boy of the house. The attackers should have blocked the battle within rings of darkness. Their inability to do so might indicate that the defending house was ready for the raid. "All cannot be going well for the attackers," Maya agreed. Drizzt could hardly believe what he was hearing. Even more alarming than the news itself was the way his family talked about the event. They were so calm in their descriptions, as if this was an expected occurrence. "The attackers must leave no witnesses," Zack explained to Drizzt, "else they will face the wrath of the ruling council." "But we are witnesses," Drizzt reasoned. "No," Zack replied. "We are onlookers. This battle is none of our affair. Only the nobles of the defending house are awarded the right to place accusations against their attackers. If any..."
There we
Alton
go.
made his way through his private chambers one final time, to make certain that any artifacts or tomes that might seem even the least bit sacrilegious were safely hidden. He was expecting a
And we're
visit
back.
from a matron mother, a rare occasion for a master of the academy not connected with Eric Tinnolith, the School of Lolth. Alton was more than a little anxious about the motives of this particular visitor. Matron Sinafe Hunnet, head of the city's 5th house and mother of massage, Alton's partner in conspiracy. A bang on the stone door of the outermost chamber in his complex told Alton that his guest had arrived. He straightened his robes and took yet another glance around the room. The door swung open before Alton could get there, and Matron Sinafe swept into the room. How easily she made the transformation, walking from the absolute dark of the outside corridor into the candlelight of Alton's chamber without so much as a flinch. Sinafe was smaller than Alton had imagined, diminutive even by the standards of the Drow. She stood barely more than 4 feet high and weighed, by Alton's estimation, no more than 50 pounds. She was a matron mother, though, and Alton reminded himself that she could strike him dead with a single spell. Alton averted his gaze obediently, and tried to convince himself that there was nothing unusual about this visit. He grew less at ease, however, when Massage trotted in and to his mother's side, a smug smile on his face. "Greetings from House Hunnet, Gel Rose," Matron Sinafe said. 25 years and more it has been since we last talked." "Gel Rose," Alton mumbled under his breath. He cleared his throat to cover his surprise. "My greetings to you, Matron Sinafe," he managed to stammer. "Has it been so very long?" "You should come to the house," the matron said. "Your chambers remain empty." My chambers? Alton began to feel very sick. Sinafe did not miss the look. A scowl crossed her face, and her eyes narrowed evilly. Alton suspected that his secret was out. If the Faceless One had been a member of the Hunnet family, how could Alton hope to fool the matron mother of the house? He scanned for the best escape route, or for some way he could at least kill the traitorous Massage before Sinafe struck him down. When he looked back toward Matron Sinafe, she had already begun a quiet spell. Her eyes popped wide at its completion, her suspicions confirmed. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice sounding more curious than concerned. There was no escape, no way to get at Massage, standing prudently close to his powerful mother's side. "Who are you?" Sinafe asked again, taking a three-headed instrument from her belt, the dreaded snake-headed whip that injected the most painful and incapacitating poison known to drow. "Alton," he stuttered, having no choice but to answer. He knew that since she now was on her guard, Sinafe would use simple magic to detect any lies he might concoct. "I am Alton DeVere." "DeVere?" Matron Sinafe appeared at least intrigued. "Of the House DeVere that died some years ago." "I am the only survivor," Alton admitted. "And you killed Gelrose and took his place as master and sorcerer," the matron reasoned, her voice snarling. Doom closed in all around Alton. I could not know his name. He would have killed me," Alton stuttered. "I killed Gelrose," came a voice from the side. Sinafe and Alton turned to Massage, who once again held his favorite two-handed crossbow. "With this," the young Hunnet explained, "on the night House DeVere fell, I found my excuse in Gelrose's battle with that one," he pointed to Alton. "Gelrose was your brother," Matron Sinafe reminded Massage. "Damn his bones," Massage spat. "For 4 miserable years I served him as if he were a matron mother. He would have kept me from Sorcerer, would have forced me into the Melee Mekvir instead." The matron looked from Massage to Alton and back to her son. "And you let this one live," she reasoned, a smile again on her lips. "You killed your enemy and forged an alliance with a new master in a single move." "As I was taught," Massage said through clenched teeth, not knowing whether punishment or praise would follow. "You were just a child," Sinafe remarked, suddenly realizing the timetable involved. Massage accepted the compliment silently. Alton watched it all anxiously. "Then what of me?" he cried. "Is my life forfeit?" Sinafe turned a glare on him. "Your life as Alton DeVere ended, so it would seem, on the night House DeVere fell. Thus you remain the faceless one, Gelrose Hunnet. I can use your eyes in the Academy to watch over my son and my enemies." Alton could hardly breathe. To so suddenly find himself allied with one of the most powerful houses in Menzoberranzan. A jumble of possibilities and questions flooded his mind, one in particular, which had haunted him for nearly 2 decades. His adopted matron mother recognized his excitement. "Speak your thoughts," she commanded. "You are a high priestess of Loth," Alton said boldly, that one notion overpowering all caution. "It is within your power to grant me my fondest desire." "You dare to ask a favor?" Matron Sinafe bulked, though she saw the torment on Alton's face and was intrigued by the apparent importance of this mystery. "Very well." "What house destroyed my family?" Alton growled. "Ask the Netherworld, I beg, Matron Sinafe." Sinafe considered the question carefully, and the possibilities of Alton's apparent thirst for vengeance. Another benefit of allowing this one into the family, Sinafe wondered. "This is known to me already," she replied. "Perhaps when you have proven your value, I will tell—" "No!" Alton cried. He stopped short, realizing that he had interrupted a matron mother, a crime that could invoke a punishment of death. Sinafe held back her angry urges. "This question must be very important for you to act so foolishly," she said. "Please," Alton begged. "I must know. Kill me if you will, but tell me first who it was." Sinafe liked his courage, and his obsession could only prove of value to her. "House Do'Urden," she said. "Do'Urden," Alton echoed, hardly believing that a house so far back in the city hierarchy could have defeated House DeVere. You will take no actions against them, Matron Sinafe warned. And I will forgive your insolence this time. You are a son of House Hunnet now. Remember always your place. She let it stay at that, knowing that one who had been clever enough to carry out such a deception for the better part of 2 decades would not be foolish enough to disobey the matron mother of his house. Come, Massage, Sinafe said to her son. Let us leave this one alone, so that he may consider his new identity. I must tell you, Matron Sinafe, Massage dared to say as he and his mother made their way out of Sorcerre. Alton de Vere is a buffoon. He might bring harm to House Hunnet. He survived the fall of his own house, Sinafe replied, and has played through the ruse as the Faceless One for 19 years. A buffoon? Perhaps, but a resourceful buffoon at the least. Massage unconsciously rubbed the area of his eyebrow that had never grown back. I have suffered the antics of Alton de Vere for all these years, he said. He does have a fair share of luck, I admit, and can get himself out of trouble, though he is usually the one who puts himself into it. Do not fear, Sinafe laughed. Alton brings value to our house. What can we hope to gain? He is a master of the academy, Sinafe replied. He gives me eyes where I now need them. She stopped her son and turned him to face her so that he might understand the implications of her every word. Alton de Vere's claim against House Do'Urden may work in our favor. He was a noble of the house with rights of accusation. You mean to use Alton de Vere's charge to rally the great houses into punishing House Do'Urden? Massage asked. The great houses would hardly be willing to strike out for an incident that occurred almost 20 years ago, Sinafe replied. House Do'Urden executed House de Vere's destruction nearly to perfection, a clean kill. To so much as speak an open charge against the Do'Urdens now would be to invite the wrath of the great houses on ourselves. What good, then, is Alton de Vere? Massage asked. His claim is useless to us. The matron replied. You are only a male, and cannot understand the complexities of the ruling hierarchy. With Alton de Vere's charge whispered into the proper ears, the ruling council might look the other way if a single house took revenge on Alton's behalf. To what end? Massage remarked, not understanding the importance. You would risk the losses of such a battle for the destruction of a lesser house? So thought House de Vere of House Do'Urden, explained Sinafe. In our world, we must be as concerned with the lower houses as with the higher ones. All of the great houses would be wise now to watch closely the moves of Daermon and Ashesbernon, the 9th house that is known as Do'Urden. It now has both a master and a mistress serving in the academy, and 3 high priestesses, with a 4th nearing the goal. 4 high priestesses? Massage pondered. In a single house. Only 3 of the top 8 houses could claim more than that. Normally, sisters aspiring to such heights inspired rivalries that inevitably thinned the ranks. And the legions of House Do'Urden number more than 350, Sinafe continued, all of them trained by perhaps the finest weapons master in all the city. Zaknafein Do'Urden, of course, Massage recalled. You have heard of him? His name is often spoken at the academy, even in Sorcerre. Good, Sinafe purred. Then you will understand the full weight of the mission I have chosen for you. An eager light came into Massage's eyes. Another Do'Urden is soon to begin there, Sinafe explained. Not a master, but a student. By the words of those few who have seen this boy, drizzed at training, he will be as fine a fighter as Zaknafein. We should not allow this. You want me to kill the boy? Massage asked eagerly. No, Sinafe replied, not yet. I want you to learn of him, to understand the motivations of his every move. If the time to strike does come, you must be ready. Massage liked the devious assignment, but one thing still bothered him more than a little. We still have Alton to consider, he said. He is impatient and daring. What are the consequences to House Hunnet if he strikes House Do'Urden before the proper time? Might we invoke open war in the city, with House Honnett viewed as the perpetrator? Do not worry, my son, Matron Sinafe replied. If Alton DeVere makes a grievous error while in the guise of Gelrose Honnett, we expose him as a murderous impostor and no member of our family. He will be an unhoused rogue, with an executioner facing him from every direction. Her casual explanation put Massage at ease, but Matron Sinafe, so knowledgeable in the ways of Drow society, had understood the risk she was taking from the moment she had accepted Alton DeVere into her house. Her plan seemed foolproof, and the possible gain, the elimination of this growing House Do'Urden, was a tempting piece of bait. But the dangers, too, were very real. While it was perfectly acceptable for one house to covertly destroy another, the consequences of failure could not be ignored. Earlier that very night, a lesser house had struck out against a rival and, if the rumors held true, had failed. The illuminations of the next day would probably force the ruling council to enact a pretense of justice, to make an example of the unsuccessful attackers. In her long life, Matron Sinafe had witnessed this justice several times. Not a single member of any of the aggressor houses, she was not even allowed to remember their names, had ever survived. Zack awakened Drizzt early the next morning. "Come," he said. "We are bid to go out of the house this day." All thoughts of sleep washed away from Drizzt at the news. "Outside the house?" he echoed. In all of his 19 years, Drizzt had never once walked beyond the adamantine fence of the Do'Urden complex. He had only watched that outside world of Menzo Baranzan from the balcony. While Zack waited, Drizzt quickly collected his soft boots and his Puafwi. "Will there be no lesson this day?" Drizzt asked. "We shall see," was all that Zack replied, but in his thoughts, the weapons master figured that Drizzt might be in for one of the most startling revelations of his life. A house had failed in a raid, and the ruling council had requested the presence of all the nobles of the city to bear witness to the weight of justice. Briza appeared in a corridor outside the practice room's door. "Hurry," she scolded. "Matron Malice does not wish our house to be among the last groups joining the gathering." The matron mother herself, floating atop a blue glowing disc, for matron mothers rarely walked through the city, led the procession out of House Do'Urden's grand gate. Briza walked at her mother's side, with Maya and Risen in the second rank, and Drizzt and Zack taking up the rear. Bierna and Dinan, attending to the duties of their positions in the academy, had gone to the ruling council's summons with a different group. All the city was astir this morning, rumbling in the rumors of the failed raid. Drizzt walked through the bustle wide-eyed, staring in wonderment at the close-up view of the decorated drow houses. Slaves of every inferior race, goblins, orcs, even giants, scrambled out of the way, recognizing Malice, riding her enchanted carriage as a matron mother. Drow commoners halted conversations and remained respectfully silent as the noble family passed. As they made their way toward the northwestern section, the location of the guilty house, they came into a lane blocked by a squabbling caravan of Duergar, gray dwarves. A dozen carts had been overturned or locked together. Apparently, two groups of Duergar had come into the narrow lane together, neither relinquishing the right of way. Briza pulled the snake-headed whip from her belt and chased off a few of the creatures, clearing the way for Malice to float up to the apparent leaders of the two groups. The dwarves turned on her
Hey, Scum
until they
TV, how you
realized her
doing?
station. "Begging your pardon, madam," one of them stammered. "Unfortunate accident
I've
is
been
all."
smoking some
Malice eyed the
Bubble
contents of one of
hash.
the nearest carts, crates of giant crab legs and other delicacies. "You have slowed my journey," Malice said calmly. "We have come to your city in hopes of trade," the other Duergar explained. He cast an angry glare at his counterpart, and Malice understood that the two were rivals, probably bartering the same goods to the
Let's
same
do a
drow
dab.
house. "I will forgive your insolence," she offered graciously, still eyeing the crates. The two Duergar suspected what was forthcoming. So did Zack. "We eat well tonight," he whispered to Drizzt with a sly wink. Matron Malice would not let such an opportunity slip by without gain. If you can see your way to deliver half of these cards to the gate of House Doerden this night, Malice finished. The Duergar started to protest, but quickly dismissed the foolish notion. How they hated dealing with drow elves. You will be compensated appropriately, Malice continued. House Doerden is not a poor house. Between both of your caravans, you will still have enough to satisfy the house you came to see. Duergar could refute the simple logic, but under these trading circumstances, where they had offended a matron mother, they knew the compensation for their valuable foods would hardly be appropriate. Still, the Grey Dwarves could only accept it all as a risk of doing business in Menzoberranzan. They bowed politely and set their troops to clearing the way for the drow procession. House Tikan-Dweez, the unsuccessful raiders of the previous night, had barricaded themselves within their 2-stalagmite structure, fully expecting others to come. Outside their gates, all of the nobles of Menzoberranzan, more than 1,000 drow, had gathered, with Matron Baenri and the other 7 matron mothers of the ruling council at their head. More disastrous for
lemon glaze,
the entirety of the 3 schools
sugar
of the academy, students and instructors, had surrounded the Tikan-Dweez compound. Matron Malice led her group to the front line behind the ruling matrons. As she was matron of the 9th house, only one step from the council, other drow nobles readily stepped out of her way. House Tikan-Dweez has angered the Spider Queen, Matron Baenri proclaimed, in a voice amplified by magical spells. Only because they failed, Zack whispered to Drizzt. Riza cast both men in the air. Matron Baenri bade 3 young drow, 2 females and a male, to her side. These are all that remains of House Freth, she explained. Can you tell us, orphans of House Freth, she asked of them, who it was that attacked your home? House Tikan-Dweez, they shouted together. Rehearsed, Zack commented. Riza turned around again. Silence, she whispered harshly. Zack slapped Drizzt on the back of the head. Yes, he agreed. Do be quiet. Drizzt started to protest, but Riza had already turned away, and Zack's smile was too wide to argue against. Then it is the will of the ruling council, Matron Baenri was saying, that House Tikan-Dweez suffer the consequences of their actions. What of the orphans of House Freth? Came a call from the crowd. Matron Baenri stroked the head of the oldest female, a cleric recently finished in her studies at the academy. Nobles they were born, and nobles they remain, Baenri said. House Baenri accepts them into its protection. They bear the name of Baenri now. Disgruntled whispers filtered through the gathering. 3 young nobles, 2 of them female, was quite a prize. Any house in the city gladly would have taken them in. Baenri, Riza whispered to Malice. Just what the first house needs, more clerics. 16 high priestesses is not enough, it seems, Malice answered. And no doubt, Baenri will take any surviving soldiers of House Freth, Riza reasoned. Malice was not so certain. Matron Baenri was walking a thin line by taking even the surviving nobles. If House Baenri got too powerful, Lolth surely would take exception. In situations such as this, where a house had been almost eradicated, surviving common soldiers were normally pooled out to bidding houses. Malice would have to watch for such an auction. Soldiers did not come cheaply, but at this time, Malice would welcome the opportunity to add to her forces, particularly if there were any magic users to be had. Matron Baenri addressed the guilty house. House Tikan-Dweez, she called. You have broken our laws and have been rightfully caught. Fight if you will, but know that you have brought this doom upon yourself. With a wave of her hand, she set the academy, the dispatcher of justice, into motion. Great braziers had been placed in 8 positions around House Tikan-Dweez, attended by mistresses of Eric Tynolith and the highest-ranking clerical students. Flames roared to life and shot into the air as the high priestesses opened gates to the lower plains. Drizzt watched closely, mesmerized and hoping to catch a glimpse of either Dinan or Vierna. denizens of the lower plains, huge, many-armed monsters, slime-covered and spitting fire, stepped through the flames. Even the nearest high priestesses backed away from the grotesque horde. The creatures gladly accepted such servitude. When the signal from Matron Behenry came, they eagerly descended upon House pt.2. Glyphs and wards exploded at every corner of the house's feeble gate, but these were mere inconveniences to the summoned creatures. The wizards and students of Sorcerer then went into action, slamming at the top of House pt.2 with conjured lightning bolts, balls of acid, and fireballs. Students and masters of Melee Magvir, the school of fighters, rushed about with heavy crossbows, firing into windows where the doomed family might try to escape. The horde of monsters bashed through the doors, lightning flashed and thunder boomed. Zack looked at Drizzt, and a frown replaced the master's smile. Caught up in the excitement, and it certainly was exciting, Drizzt bore an expression of awe. The first screams of the doomed family rolled out from the house, screams so terrible and agonized that they stole any macabre pleasure that Drizzt might have been experiencing. He grabbed Zack's shoulder, spinning the weapons master to him, begging for an explanation. One of the sons of House pt.2, fleeing a 10-armed giant monster, stepped out onto the balcony of a high window. A dozen crossbow quarrels struck him simultaneously, and before he even fell dead, 3 separate lightning bolts alternately lifted him from the balcony, then dropped him back onto it. Scorched and mutilated, the drow corpse started to tumble from its high place, but the grotesque monster reached out a huge clawed hand from the window and pulled it back in to devour it. Drow justice, Zack said coldly. He didn't offer Drizzt any consolation. He wanted the brutality of this moment to stick in the young drow's mind for the rest of his life. The siege went on for more than an hour, and when it was finished, when the denizens of the lower plains were dismissed through the Brazier's gates, and the students and instructors of the academy started their march back to Tir-Bresh, House pt.2 was no more than a glowing lump of lifeless, molten stone. Drizzt watched it all, horrified, but too afraid of the consequences to run away. He did not notice the artistry of Menzo Berenzon on the return trip to House Do'Urden. 10. Stain of blood.
Zack Nafane is out of the house? Malice asked. I sent him and Risen to the academy.
Alright, everyone. I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. Excuse me. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support.